Welcome back, Virtual Circuit Riders. In our last episode, we left off with the complaint from the lay leader Thomas Taylor at John Street in New York City, complaining that Webb and Embry lacked the qualifications. This letter was sent in April 1768, and it took John Wesley an entire year to really discern the need for the American mission and to put the question before the Leeds annual conference of the British Methodist movement. They decided to set apart two men, Richard Boardman and Joseph Pillmore, as depicted here in two engravings. John Wesley was not originally convinced of the need for sending preachers to America because in 1768, 1769, the movement was growing so well in Britain that he felt that he needed all the preachers he could get during that period. But he took action in 1769 and put the question before the British Methodist preachers in Leeds, England. And he stated to the conference, "We have a pressing call from our brethren in New York who have built a meeting house and an invitation to come over and to help them." The old Macedonian call of Paul in the New Testament. Who are willing to go? And these two men, Joseph Pillmore and Richard Boardman, answer the call. And this sets a precedent that continues today. Wesley was not in the habit of securing volunteers to go to America or to go to his circuits in Britain, but because he saw America as a mission due to his own missionary experience in Savannah 30 plus years earlier, he felt the need to ask for volunteers, and these two were the ones that answered that call. So the following day, these two young men consolidated their volunteer willingness to go, and in 2 weeks they sailed for America. The Leeds Conference of the British Methodists contributed £70 and conveyed the money to them through them to America. £20 they raised, the conference raised for the passage, and £50 were given towards the debt on the chapel. So in a sense, the preachers answered Thomas Taylor, the layperson's need for fundraising as much as preaching experience. So Boardman and Pillmore arrive in Gloucester, New Jersey, and sail up into Philadelphia, and they begin splitting their time between Philadelphia here, and New York City. Richard Boardman was a year older than Joseph Pillmore. Boardman was only 31 at the time of his arrival in the New World, with Pillmore being only 30. And Wesley sent Boardman as his assistant, or his presiding elder, if you will, in later American Methodist parlance. And so Boardman had the oversight, as it were, of the two. And as they arrived in Philadelphia, the idea was that 3 times a year the preachers would exchange between Philadelphia and New York. However, once they hit the ground, this notion of quarterly cooperation and exchange of pulpits between John Street in New York and Old St. George's in Philadelphia, broke down. It broke down over time, and the men were respectful of each other, but in some ways rather distant, going their own way, as it were. And Pillmore took to the Philadelphia area and to the city itself, St. George's, took the city life there, and Boardman found New York more congenial to his work there. Again, St. George's was the site of Pillmore's work, and Boardman in the New York area. Though the men worked in the two largest cities of America at the time, it was not easy work even in those cities. They tried to get out from the city on horseback, but by and large they found the work in the cities to be most effective. Boardman preached 4 sermons a week and met on Wednesday evenings in society on the class meeting model. And he wrote that even though the roads are bad and the rides are long, the living is very poor, but what more than compensates for these difficulties is the prospect of advancing the Redeemer's kingdom, bringing sinners to the knowledge of the truth as it is in Jesus. The greater part of the round or circuit, the people were wicked and ignorant to the most lamentable degree, destitute of the fear and regardless of the worship of God. But such a reformation is wrought among them as shows the amazing love and almighty power of God. So Boardman was a man of pious and sensible nature, according to Wesley, and found through his steady work some sense of progress, although nothing in his own writings or in Wesley's own later thoughts about him indicate any real great response to his work. Boardman and Pillmore both received a salary of $15 a quarter, and so because of the arrangements with the local churches there to pay them quarterly, the preacher's remuneration or salary was known in early Methodism and for many years after as quarterage, to be paid on the quarter. They itinerated throughout the city, and particularly Pillmore used a Wednesday night in St. George's to invite many of the learned converted to hear him speak on various topics, kind of a Wednesday night lecture series that was less sermon and more intellectual inquiry into various biblical and theological topics. So Pillmore really sets in motion in Philadelphia kind of an urban ministry. Neither had parsonages. They were living, although Boardman in the New York area had a small set of rooms there on the exterior of John Street. But they both committed themselves to learning and to reading and trying to minister to the churches there in New York and in Philadelphia. One interesting insight into sort of the struggles financially that these men had, in addition to that whoppingly large salary of $15 per quarter, each year the churches set aside 4 quires, Q-U-I-R-E-S, of sheets of paper for writing, and a quire was really 4 sheets of paper, so they had the equivalent of about 16 sheets of paper to write their sermons. Evidently they were very learned and wrote well beyond their allotment of 16 sheets of paper, because they went into their own salaries to pay for their paper. So it indicates that it was a learned ministry determined to reach what level of literacy there was in New York and Philadelphia. And you can remember that Pillmore was in Philadelphia, Pillmore in Fillmore, and Boardman more in the New York area. But again, it kind of shows that even in the early days, the stereotype of circuit riders riding out in the country is false. They were more of an urban ministry. Boardman in particular had a real, in his diaries that we see from the time, a real sympathetic attachment to the numbers of African Americans that were coming to hear him preach. He wrote to John Wesley in 1769, shortly upon arriving, and it's an observation on the John Street Church. The number of blacks that attend the preaching affects me much. One of them cannot tell me she could neither eat nor sleep because her master would not suffer her to come to hear the word. She wept exceedingly, saying, I told my master I would do more than ever I used to do if he would let me come to religious services. Nay, I would do everything in my power to be a good servant. And Boardman recounts that this woman had a glorious conversion and continued in the joy that Methodists like to see during this period until her death. He also wrote in a letter in 1771 that he has been affected by the deaths of some of the African Americans who have gone off the stage of time rejoicing in the God of their salvation. His pastoral care instincts were probably stronger than his preaching. We see more of the pastoral care, although he recounts that many came to hear him preach and could not find place in the John Street Church. Nonetheless, he says, I asked one poor Negro on the point of death, are you afraid to die? Oh no, said she, I have my blessed Savior in my heart. I should be glad to die. I want to be gone, that I may be with him forever. I know that he loves me, and I feel I love him with all my heart. She continued to declare the great things God had done for her and her soul, to the astonishment of many, till the Lord took her. Several more seem ready to be gone, longing for the happy time when mortality shall be swallowed up in life. Boardman was what we would call the first presiding elder or district superintendent. And we see more of his work in pastoral care with the African Americans. Pillmore also notes many of the African Americans that come to class meetings, and it shows that the diaries of both men, which we have, manuscript accounts, indicates a strong African American presence in both John Street in New York City and in Old St. George's in Pillmore's case. Pillmore's work in Philadelphia was more ecumenically based and more vigorous in preaching, and he made contacts in networks there that Methodists were able to enjoy. His preaching and his weekly Wednesday preaching series were quite popular across the ecumenical. 2 years after their time, however, John Wesley sends Francis Asbury and another man, Richard Wright, to America in 1771 to relieve Boardman of his duties because he was not itinerating quite enough. Asbury would take his place in America with a 45-year ministry, which we will look at in some depth. But he was critical of both Boardman and Pillmore because they stayed too much in Philadelphia and in New York City in the case of Boardman, and Philly in the case of Pillmore, and enforced a discipline to get these preachers out into the countryside, out of the cities. And though they felt aggrieved by this upbraiding by John Wesley through Asbury, you can see here on this map that Boardman began one of the first forays into New England in spring of 1772, beginning a small society in Boston. His work was not extremely successful, but Pillmore undertook a year-long ministry southward, going along the coastal region through Petersburg, Virginia, Norfolk, Virginia, and all the way to Savannah and back. Pillmore was able to found the Baltimore Lovely Lane Chapel, which we'll see has a historic place later on. But you can see that British Methodist Circuit number 50, according to Wesley's idea, had begun to emerge with Asbury's arrival.